Hi all and welcome to my online chemistry classroom. In this video we are going to begin to work through Unit 2 of the National 5 Chemistry course. This unit is called Nature's Chemistry and we are going to begin by looking at fuels for our first lesson. Your success criteria for this lesson is that you have been successful if you can describe what is meant by a fuel and explain in detail what a fossil fuel is and how it is formed. So our first question for this lesson is, what is a fuel? And I want you to take a moment to think about this. The definition for a fuel is a substance that can react with oxygen to release or produce energy. Now in Unit 1 we discussed the indicators of a chemical reaction, and one of those was a change in energy or temperature. At that time we learned two different names for chemical reactions that experience a change in energy. What type of reaction does a fuel undergo? Hopefully you all remembered correctly and answered with an exothermic reaction. Exothermic reactions release energy to the surroundings. For example, the reaction container gets very warm. Okay, and the way to think about that is exo from exothermic and explosions. All fuels contain energy from the sun. That energy is stored in the chemical bonds within the compound through processes such as photosynthesis. Now we know many different examples of fuels, and some of the main ones include wood, petrol, coal and peat. Let's have a little bit of a talk about where that fuel's energy comes from. Okay, so carbohydrates are compounds which contain carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. Remember the 8 ATE in a compound name means that there's a third compound, usually oxygen, present. We can think of carbohydrates as having trapped all the energy from the sun in their bonds. When those fuels are burned, we break those bonds and release the energy from the bond out into the atmosphere. The three main fuels that we use in the UK today are coal, oil and natural gas. These are all examples of fossil fuels, and they are so named because they are produced from the fossils of once living. Fossil fuels are created over millions of years from the fossilised remains of dead animals and plants. This means that those fossil fuels are finite energy sources, so they will one day run out because we are using them far faster than they can form, than they can replenish themselves. In order to prevent a fuel crisis when we do inevitably run out of these fossil fuels, governments and countries have been thinking of alternative ways to produce energy, and you will all have heard about these before. These are our renewable energy sources. What I would like you to do now is to note down 3 renewable energy sources and 3 finite energy sources. You will need to know how fossil fuels are formed, and there are 2 different processes, one for coal and another for natural gas and oil. Over the next few slides there are some infographics detailing this process, which you should read carefully.
Fossil fuels. Fossil fuel is a term used to describe a group of energy sources that were formed from ancient plants and organisms during the Carboniferous period approximately 360 to 286 million years ago, even before the age of dinosaurs. At that time, the land was covered with swamps filled with organisms and plants. As they died, they sank to the bottom of swamps and oceans and over millions of years started decomposing under layers of sand, clay, and other minerals. Different types of fossil fuels formed depending on the combination of organic matter, temperature, time, and pressure conditions while decomposing. There are three major types of fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Coal was formed from ferns, plants, and trees, which hardened due to pressure and heat. Oil was formed from small organisms like zooplankton and algae, where pressure caused the more complex organic matter to decompose. Natural gas was formed by the same process as oil, only it was exposed to more heat and pressure, causing it to further decompose and turn into a gaseous form. Fossil fuels are sought-after energy sources because they have a high energy density. They are the world's dominant energy source. Fossil fuels have a variety of applications from electricity production to transport fuels. They can also be used to make a variety of common products, from plastics to cosmetics to even some medicines. These resources have powered industrialization over history and continue to do so today. Fossil fuels can be an abundant and cheap, or in some cases, a scarce and expensive form of energy, depending on geographic location. For this reason, geopolitical issues arise due to scarcity caused by the natural geographic allocation of these highly valuable resources. Fossil fuels are considered non-renewable resources because they take millions of years to form, which means that once they are used, the resources will not be replenished in a human lifetime. The gradual depletion of the most accessible fossil fuel reserves have forced companies to develop technologies for extracting more challenging or unconventional reserves. In many cases, this means additional safety and environmental concerns as well as higher costs. Fossil fuels are also the largest emitters of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas which causes climate change. In addition, their production causes both environmental and human health issues. These concerns have triggered society to look at alternate sources of energy that are more environmentally sustainable and renewable. That's fossil fuels.
Now that you have read all about and watched how fossil fuels are formed, you should be able to answer these 4 questions. Question 1, what is a fossil fuel? Question 2, what are the 3 main types of fossil fuels? Question 3, describe briefly how coal is formed. That means it doesn't have to be an A4 page, but it should definitely be a few sentences. And 4, describe briefly how oil and natural gas are formed. Remember, when you are answering these questions, answer them in sentences so that when you're studying and you're looking back in your jotter, you can see what question you were answering at the time. And that is us finished for today. So that's been your first lesson in 4th year chemistry on fuels, and I will see you next day to go over crude oil and fractional distillation.